I'm Nadine Thorpe, 45, and I gave 23 years to the United States Army, rising to colonel, while my own family called it a phase. For years I paid their bills, covered their emergencies, and swallowed their jokes, folding myself smaller every single time so that no one around me would feel uncomfortable. But when my mother straightened my collar at my sister's wedding and told me to take off my costume, and a young Army captain across the room came to attention because he knew exactly who I was, I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been dismissed by the very people you gave everything to? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being wronged, hit that like button and subscribe. In my mother's house, achievement had to be the kind the neighbors could see. That was the first rule I ever learned, though no one said it out loud. It lived in the way the refrigerator door worked. Preston's baseball trophies got a shelf in the living room, dusted every Sunday. Camille's dance recital ribbons went on the wall in the hallway, where guests passed on their way to the bathroom, so they could not help but see. My things went on the refrigerator, held there with a magnet shaped like a strawberry, and they stayed for a day, maybe two. And then they were gone, and the strawberry held a coupon for carpet cleaning instead. I built a model bridge in the 7th grade that held 40 pounds of textbooks before it buckled. My science teacher kept it on her desk for a month and told my mother, at a parent night, that I thought like an engineer. My mother smiled the smile she used for strangers and said, on the drive home, that it was nice I had a little hobby, and did I know that Camille had been asked to dance a solo? I was 12. I remember looking out the window at the streetlights going by and deciding that I would build things that were too big to fit on a refrigerator. I did not know yet that some people will refuse to see a thing no matter how large you make it. There's a particular loneliness to being the child a family cannot quite place. I was not mistreated. No one raised a hand to me or sent me to bed hungry. It was subtler than that, and in some ways harder to name because there is no word for the wound of being politely overlooked in your own home. When Preston struck out in a Little League game, the whole family drove 2 towns over to watch him do it and cheered anyway and took him for ice cream after. When I won a district engineering award at 15, the certificate came in the mail on a Tuesday and my mother set it on the counter under the car keys and forgot it there until it grew a coffee ring. I did not throw a fit. I taught myself instead to need less. I told myself needing less was strength. It took me 30 years to understand that a child who teaches herself to need less is not getting stronger. She's getting quieter, and the two are easy to confuse from the outside. What made it bearable was that I did love them, and they were, in the ways they knew how, lovable. My father taught me to change a tire in the driveway on a Saturday and to check my own oil, and those hours with the hood up were some of the happiest of my girlhood, the two of us not talking much, just working, and I have thought since that I went into a profession of roads and machines partly to stay in that driveway with him forever. Camille, 8 years younger, followed me around when she was small and thought I hung the moon, and I braided her hair and read to her and covered for her when she broke things. And for a while, before the family sorted us into our permanent roles, we were simply sisters. I hold on to that. It matters to the rest of the story that the love was real. If it had not been, none of it would have hurt the way it did. And I would not have spent 2 decades trying to earn my way back into a room I had never actually been asked to leave. We were not a poor family or a cruel one, not in the way people mean when they say those words. My father, Leland, sold insurance and coached Preston's teams and fell asleep in his chair with the newspaper tented on his chest. My mother, Gloria, ran the house and the church rummage sale and the unspoken accounting of who in our family was doing well and who was letting the side down. I was, from very early, filed under the second heading, not for anything I did. For being serious in a house that measured worth in applause, and for wanting things that did not come with the ceremony my mother could photograph. I enlisted the thought quietly, and then I enlisted for real, and in the spring of 2003, I was commissioned a 2nd lieutenant in the United States Army Corps of Engineers. I was 22. The ceremony was small and bright, and it was, I think, the proudest hour of my life to that point. My father came. He wore a tie and he shook my hand and his eyes were wet, and I let myself believe for about 90 minutes that something had shifted. Then he checked his watch and said he was sorry, but Preston had a sales banquet that night and he had promised, and he left before the reception ended. My mother did not come at all. She called that evening and said, in the voice she used to make a wound sound like a favor, that she was glad it made me happy, and that she supposed a paycheck was a paycheck. I want to be fair to her, even now. She had a picture of a good daughter's life, and that picture had a wedding in it and grandchildren nearby and a job you could explain in one sentence at the salon. A daughter in a uniform, gone for a year at a time to places she could not pronounce, did not fit the frame. So my mother did what people do with a thing that does not fit. She trimmed it down until it did. In her telling, I was not an officer. I was a girl who had run off to play army because she could not settle down, and every promotion I earned was, to her, another year of me being difficult on purpose. I learned to stop bringing it home. I learned that if I mentioned a deployment, my mother would change the subject to Camille's apartment search, and if I mentioned a medal, Preston would ask, grinning, whether they gave those out for perfect attendance. So I stopped. I folded that whole enormous part of my life into a duffel and left it at the door whenever I visited. And I told myself that was maturity. It was not. It was surrender wearing a nicer coat. What I did instead was pay. When Camille wanted to go to a college the family could not quite afford, I wired the difference and asked my mother not to mention where it came from, and she did not, and I do not think Camille knew for years. When the roof over that house started to fail, I covered it. When my father's car died, a check appeared and no one asked how. I told myself that being useful was the same as being wanted. It is not. It took me the better part of 2 decades and a wedding to learn the difference, and I am going to tell you how. I should tell you what the paying actually looked like, because I think there are people listening who will recognize it. It is never presented as a transaction. It arrives disguised as love. A phone call that begins with, "How are you?" and turns within 4 minutes to a problem that money would solve, and a silence afterward that is shaped exactly like a checkbook. I got very good at hearing the shape of that silence. I paid for Camille's second year when the scholarship fell through, and I paid the plumber the winter the pipes burst, and I paid for my father's dental work the year his practice slowed, and every time I paid, I asked for nothing except that it not be mentioned, and every time my request was honored so completely that within a month it was as if the money had appeared by weather. I did not do it to be thanked. That is the trap people fall into when they hear a story like mine, thinking the wound is ingratitude. It is not ingratitude. I did not want a plaque. I wanted to be a person whose absence would be felt, and I had confused being needed with being loved. And so I made myself endlessly needed and waited to feel loved, and the feeling never came, because that is not how the arithmetic works. You cannot buy your way into a heart that has already decided what shelf you belong on. By the winter of 2025, I was a colonel. I had commanded a company in combat and a battalion after that, and I was commanding a brigade, thousands of soldiers and their equipment and their lives, and none of it had a place at my mother's table. I mention the rank not to brag, but so you understand the shape of the thing. A person can be trusted with an enormous piece of the country's business and be treated at home like the child who cannot be relied upon to choose the right shoes. The call came in December. Camille, bright and breathless, telling me she was engaged. His name was Owen, she said, and then she laughed and added that he was in the army too, so I would finally have someone to talk to at holidays. She said it the way you would mention that a cousin also liked a certain television show. A small coincidence. A party trick. I congratulated her, and I meant it, because I loved my sister even when she did not know how to love me back, and I offered to help pay for the wedding the way I had helped pay for everything. My mother got on the line and said warmly that they had it handled and that I should just come and enjoy myself for once. I said yes to the invitation the way I said yes to everything with them, hoping this time would be different. The months before the wedding taught me, again, the thing I kept forgetting, that the pattern was not an accident I could fix by trying harder. It was the water the family swam in, and I was the one who kept expecting the water to notice me. There was a dress fitting in the spring. I found out about it from a group text, except that I had not been in the group text. Camille had made a thread for the bridal party and the mothers, and at some point realized I was not on it and added me back with a little apology and a heart. By then, the fitting was over. I read the messages that had happened without me, the plans and the jokes and the photographs of my sister turning in a white dress, and I felt the specific loneliness of being an afterthought in your own family, which is different from being excluded outright. Exclusion at least admits you exist. An afterthought is a person the room forgot it had. Preston made it worse the way he always did, which was cheerfully, as if his needling were a kind of affection I should be grateful for. There was a family dinner in April, my brother holding court about a country club membership he had just bought into. The initiation fee, the waiting list, the golf course designed by someone whose name I was supposed to recognize. Then he turned to me with that grin. "Still doing the boots and camo thing," he said. "When did they let you retire from summer camp?" The table laughed, the easy laugh of people who had laughed at this joke for 20 years and found it as comfortable as a couch. Preston and I had been sorted early, and the sorting had made him what he was, as surely as it had made me what I was. He was the firstborn son in a family that treated a firstborn son like a small weather system, and he had grown up believing that attention was a thing you were owed rather than a thing you earned, and he had built a life to keep the attention coming. The country club was the newest room in that life. Before it, there had been the boat, and before the boat, the second house, and before the house, the car with the badge on the hood that he mentioned within a sentence of meeting anyone new. None of it was wrong exactly. A man is allowed to buy a boat. What curdled it was that he needed everyone to see the boat, needed the seeing the way I had once needed my mother to look at a certificate. And because he had never been made to go without that seeing, he had no idea what it cost the people who did. So he made his little jokes about summer camp, and he made them in front of our parents, and our parents laughed, and it never once occurred to him that he was standing on someone to reach the light. I do not hate my brother for it. I have led enough young men to know that a person can be made careless by too much praise as easily as another is made small by too little, and that both are a kind of injury, and that only one of them draws sympathy. I want to be honest about my own part in it, too. For 20 years, I let it happen. I sat at those dinners and swallowed those jokes and told myself that keeping the peace was the mature thing, the officer thing, the disciplined thing. I was disciplined everywhere else in my life. I could stand in front of a formation and hold a hard line without blinking, and I could make a decision under fire that would keep men alive. And I could not, would not, say to my own brother across a plate of pot roast that the joke was old and it hurt. That failure was mine. I name it because this is a story about finally stopping, and you cannot honestly tell a story about stopping without admitting how long you kept going. My father looked at his plate. My mother smiled. I said nothing because I had learned that saying something only extended the entertainment. I had by then been shot at. I had knelt in the dirt beside soldiers who were younger than Preston's expensive watch and told them they were going to be fine, while I was not at all sure it was true. I had signed letters to families, I had built roads through places that did not want roads, and cleared bombs off of them so that boys could come home with their legs. And to my brother, I was a person who went to summer camp. I want you to understand that I was not angry at the dinner, or not only angry. Mostly I was tired in a way that sleep does not touch. The tiredness of holding a shape you have outgrown because the people you love will only recognize you in the old outline. The uniform came up in May. My mother called and she was gentle, which was how I knew it was going to hurt. She wanted to talk about the wedding, about photographs, about how everything would look. And then she said, as if it were a small, practical kindness, that she hoped I would not wear the outfit to the ceremony. "It photographs strange," she said. "People ask questions. It makes the day about the wrong thing. The outfit." She meant my army service uniform, the dark blue coat and trousers I had earned the right to wear one rank at a time across 23 years. She called it an outfit the way she would call a costume an outfit, and she asked me not to wear it to my own sister's wedding because it would make people ask questions, and I understood then that the questions were the problem, not the uniform. The uniform might have caused someone at that wedding to learn who I actually was, and that was the thing my mother had spent 23 years preventing. She had mistaken my life's work for a phase, and she needed everyone else to keep making the same mistake, or the story she told about her difficult middle daughter would stop making sense. I did not argue on the phone. I said I would think about it. Then I sat in my car in the parking lot of the commissary for a long time, and I thought about it the way you think about a thing you have already decided. I was going to wear the uniform, not to prove anything. I had stopped needing to prove things to my brigade a long time ago, and if I could not need it from thousands of soldiers, I would not let myself need it from my mother. I was going to wear it because I had spent my whole life agreeing to be smaller so that the people around me would be comfortable. And I had finally reached the end of what I was willing to trade for that comfort. A person can only fold herself so many times before the creases become permanent. I did not want to become permanent in that shape. So I packed the dress blues myself. I pressed the coat until the fabric held a line you could set a level against. I polished the eagles, the silver eagles that mean colonel, until they caught the light, and I set them on the shoulders where they belonged, and I looked at myself in the mirror of a hotel the night before, a stranger to my family and entirely myself. And I drove home the next morning telling myself it would be fine. It was not going to be fine, but it was going to be true, and I had spent too long choosing the first over the second. The church was one of those tall brick ones with white columns, and a lawn the town kept green out of habit. I arrived early, because I always arrive early, a habit the army beats into you, and life never beats back out. Guests were filtering in through the big front doors, women in pastels holding their hats against the wind, men tugging at collars, and the light through the stained glass fell in colored blocks across the stone floor of the narthex. I stood near the guest book in my dress blues, and I felt, for a moment, almost peaceful. My mother found me before the piece could set. She came across the narthex fast and low, the way she moved when she wanted a word without a scene, and she reached up and put her hands on my collar as if to fix it, though nothing was wrong with it. Her fingers pressed the fabric flat. She leaned in close enough that I could smell her powder and the hairspray she had used since I was a child. And she straightened the collar that did not need straightening, and she hissed so that only I could hear. "Take off that costume," she said. "You look ridiculous playing soldier at a real event." I looked at her. I had imagined a dozen answers over the months, some of them sharp, some of them pleading, and standing there, I found I wanted none of them. I said it quietly, the way you say a true thing that does not need volume. "It is my uniform, Mom," I said. "I earned it." She rolled her eyes. She actually rolled her eyes, the way she had when I was 14, and said something she found dramatic, and she turned away from me to go greet a cousin. Her hand already lifting into a wave. The matter closed in her mind as easily as a cabinet door. Camille passed a moment later on her father's arm, radiant and nervous in her white dress, and she saw me, and her face did a complicated thing. She leaned in as she went by and whispered that I was making today about myself, and please, just this once, could I not? Then she was gone toward the doors at the back where brides wait. A little cluster of relatives near the guest book had watched the whole thing, my mother's hands on my collar, my sister's whisper, and they looked at me with the mild pity people save for someone who is embarrassed herself and does not know it yet. I stood in my uniform in the colored light and I let it happen, because there was nothing to do but let it happen, and I told myself I had survived worse in worse places. That was when the side door opened and the groom came in. I had not met Owen. The wedding was the first time our lives were meant to touch. He came in from the side room in his own army blues, a captain's twin silver bars on his shoulders, straightening his jacket, a young man on the biggest morning of his life, with his mind entirely on the woman waiting at the back of the church. He was crossing toward the front, toward the place a groom stands, and his eyes moved across the narthex the way anyone's would, taking in the guests, and then his eyes reached me, and he stopped. He stopped the way a man stops when the ground is not where he expected it. His gaze went to the silver eagle on my shoulder, and then to my face, and then back to the eagle. And I watched something move through him, recognition arriving all at once the way it does, and the color changed in his face. He came to attention. Not the loose civilian straightening of a man remembering his manners. Real attention, heels together, shoulders back, chin level. The whole body snapping into a line I had seen 10,000 times and had never once seen in that narthex full of people who thought I played dress-up. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried, because the room had already begun to go quiet around us. "I know who you are." The narthex stilled. My mother, 3 steps away, turned back with the wave dying on her hand. Owen did not look away from me. "Kandahar," he said. "The riverbed, ma'am. You came for us." I felt the year fold in half. 2012. A dry riverbed south of nowhere and a squad of infantry pinned in it. In a road no one could cross because someone had spent the night burying reasons not to. I did not say any of that. I said his rank, gently, and told him to stand easy, and he did not quite manage it, because some things go too deep to shrug off on command. From a pew near the front, a man in a dark suit rose. He was perhaps 50, straight-backed, and he crossed to us with the unhurried certainty of someone who has spent his life in rooms where rank is real. He was Owen's battalion commander, a lieutenant colonel named Marcus Ree, a guest at the Groom's invitation, and he took in the eagle in my face and Owen at attention, and he understood the whole shape of it in a breath. He turned, not unkindly, to my mother and the frozen cluster of relatives, and he said, in a voice pitched for the room, that they might not know it, but they were standing with Colonel Nadine Thorpe, and that the silver eagle meant she commanded thousands of soldiers, and that the young man at attention was alive because of something she did a long way from here. My mother's mouth opened and nothing came out. The certainty she had worn for 23 years, smooth and total, cracked right down the middle in front of her whole guest list. I wish I could tell you that I felt triumphant. People expect that when they hear a story like this. They want the moment where the wronged woman feels the warm rush of vindication, and I understand the wanting, because I had imagined that moment too in weaker hours, had let myself picture my mother's face doing exactly what it was doing now. But standing there in the colored light with a captain at attention in front of me and my mother's mouth working around nothing, I did not feel triumph. I felt a strange and heavy tenderness, and under it, a grief so old I had stopped noticing its weight. Because none of this had needed to happen this way. My mother could have known who I was at any point in 23 years. All she had ever had to do was ask and listen to the answer, and she had chosen 1,000 times not to, and it had taken a stranger in a uniform, a boy from a ditch on the other side of the world, to make her look at her own daughter. That is not a victory. That is a bill coming due, and there's no pleasure in watching someone you love realize, in public, what they have spent decades refusing to see. Owen was still standing there, and I could see that he was distressed on my behalf, that he had walked into a family's private wound without meaning to, and was trying to work out whether he had made things worse. I put a hand out, not touching him, just a small settling motion, the one you use with a young soldier who has done exactly the right thing and does not yet know it. "It is all right, Captain," I told him quietly. "You did nothing wrong. Go and get married." He held my eyes for a moment longer, and then he nodded. And the discipline of the day took him back over, and he squared himself and walked to the front of the church to wait for his bride. Ree gave me a small nod, the nod of one senior officer to another that says I have your back if you want it and I will disappear if you do not. And he returned to his pew. And I was left standing in a narthex full of people who were seeing me all at once, for the first time, and who did not know what to do with what they saw. For the first time in my mother's house of people, the room went quiet for me, and she did not understand why. The ceremony went ahead, of course. Weddings have their own momentum, and a moment in a narthex, however strange, cannot stop a bride at the back of a church. Camille walked the aisle on our father's arm, and Owen turned to watch her come with his eyes shining, and for the length of the vows, the room forgot the thing it had just seen. I sat in a middle pew in my dress blues and watched my sister marry a man who had come to attention for me an hour before she married him. And I felt a great many things at once, which is the honest condition of most important days. When the recessional had passed and the guests spilled out onto the green lawn to wait for the couple, I found a place at the edge of the church steps, a little apart, and Frances Udall came and stood with me. Frances had been my sergeant major for 2 of the hardest years of my career, and she was retired now. And she was my +1, because when the invitation said, and guessed, I could think of no one on earth I would rather have beside me. She was 58 and built like a fence post, and she missed nothing. "They didn't miss it, because it was hidden, ma'am," she said, watching the guests mill on the grass. She was talking about my family, and she did not need me to explain. "You didn't hide any of it. They missed it because they never once looked." I did not answer right away. Out on the lawn, my mother was moving from cluster to cluster, and I could see, even from the steps, that she was already at work, already reshaping the morning into something she could hold. She would be saying, I knew, that of course we always knew Nadine was in the service. It was hardly a secret that Ree man made such a production. She would sand the corners off it until it fit back on the refrigerator for a day and then vanished. I let myself go back, standing there to the riverbed, because Frances was one of the few people I could stand next to and remember it. 2012. I was a captain, 31 years old, commanding a route clearance company, which is a polite name for the people who drive first down the roads to find the bombs before the bombs find everyone else. There had been an infantry squad in a dry riverbed south of a village, pinned after a strike. And the road to them was seeded so thick that the book said, "Wait." I did not wait. I put my element on that road, and we cleared it a slow yard at a time under fire. And we reached the riverbed, and we brought the squad out, all of them, everyone. One of them was a 19-year-old specialist who had been sure he was going to die in that ditch and did not. And his name, though I did not know it that day, was Owen Brandt. The Army gave me a silver star for it. My mother, when the citation came, asked whether it was the kind of thing you could frame. "He named the ridge," Frances said quietly, as if she had followed me back there. "He named the count. 9 of them came off that road because of you. He has carried your face for 14 years, and your own mother called your uniform a costume this morning. I have thought a great deal about why the riverbed comes back to me the way it does, always in pieces, always the small things rather than the large. Not the noise, which was enormous, and not the fear, which was total, though both were there. What comes back is the weight of a man's arm across my shoulders as we moved him, and the way the dust turned the light, the color of a bruise, and a private beside me who kept saying a girl's name over and over like a prayer or an address, and I never learned whether she was a sweetheart or a sister or a mother, only that he needed to say her name to keep his hand steady. And so I let him say it. I remember deciding to go. That is the part people ask about, when they ask at all. They want to know how you decide to drive onto a road you know is seeded with bombs, and the truth is that you do not decide the way you decide other things. You look at the map, and you look at the clock, and you know that the squad in that riverbed has perhaps an hour. And you know that the book says wait for a route to be cleared that cannot be cleared in an hour. And somewhere under all the training, a simpler voice says those are our people, and we are not going to leave them, and your mouth is giving the order before the rest of you has caught up. I did not feel brave. I have never once felt brave. I felt like a person doing the only thing that would let her live with herself afterward, which is a different feeling entirely, and quieter, and I think it is the feeling most people who are called brave would tell you about if you asked them honestly. Frances was quiet beside me for a while after that, letting me be where I'd gone. Then she said, not looking at me, that she had watched a lot of officers over 30 years, and that the ones worth following were never the ones who needed you to know it. "You never needed them to know it, ma'am," she said, "meaning my family. That is the whole tragedy of it. You were the realest thing in that church and the only one who never once asked for the credit." I told her that maybe that had been my mistake, all those years, the not asking. And Frances shook her head slowly and said no. The mistake was theirs. You do not have to ask people to look at you. Looking is the least a family owes a person. It is the floor, not the ceiling, and they could not even give you the floor. I watched Gloria on the lawn, and I felt the old pull, the lifelong reflex to cross the grass and help her, to smooth the day, to say something that would let her off the hook and let the family back into its comfortable shape. My whole life, I had been the one who made things easier for everyone else. And standing on those steps, for the first time, I felt the reflex and did not obey it. I stayed where I was. I let my mother work the lawn without my help. Owen found me before we went into the reception. He came up the steps still in his blues, a married man now, and he stopped in front of me and did not sit. He asked formally, almost shyly, whether he might introduce me to his new wife properly. "As who you are," he said. Not as the sister nobody explained. As my colonel. I had spent my life being useful to my family and had mistaken it for being known. A boy I had pulled out of a ditch on the worst day of his life, wanted, on the best day of his, to make sure the room knew my name. The difference between those two things is the whole distance I had traveled without noticing, and it caught up with me on the church steps and put a hand around my throat. I had spent my life carrying them. For one afternoon, I let someone carry the truth for me. The reception was in a hall with high windows and round tables and a band setting up in the corner, and by the time I came in from the steps, my mother had her version half built. I heard pieces of it as I moved through the room. We all knew she was in the service. she was saying to a table of ants. It was never any secret. That officer made such a scene. You know how they are. She said it lightly, a woman brushing lint from the day, and the ants nodded because it is easier to nod. Preston tried the old joke one more time. He had a drink in his hand and an audience, and he could not help himself. He was telling someone about my summer camp, the boots and camo thing, when he realized, a beat too late, that Owen and Lieutenant Colonel Rhee were within earshot at the next table. Both in uniform, both listening with the flat patience of men who had heard a great many things they chose not to answer. Preston's sentence lost its air. I was just kidding around, he said. To no one in particular. We always joke. She knows we joke. No one laughed. The joke had lived for 20 years on the fact that nobody in the room knew what I was. In a room that suddenly knew, it simply died, and my brother stood holding the body of it, not understanding what had changed. Then Owen stood to give a toast, and it was not the toast anyone expected. He thanked Camille's family for welcoming him. He thanked his own parents. And then he said that he wanted to tell them all a story about the woman sitting at table 4, because he did not think he would get a better chance. And because he had waited 14 years to say it to her face. And he told them. He told the room about the riverbed, and the road, and the company that came down it when the book said wait. He kept it simple, and he kept his voice steady until the end, and he told 200 wedding guests that he was standing there, married that day, able to become anything at all, because Colonel Nadine Thorpe had decided that 9 soldiers in a ditch were worth more than her own safety. He raised his glass to me. The room turned to look, and this time there was no pity in it. I did not know where to put my eyes while he spoke. There is no training for being honored by accident in a room full of the people who spent your life declining to honor you. I looked at the tablecloth, and then at Owen's steady young face. And then, because I could not help it, at my mother. She had gone very still. She was holding her water glass with both hands, the way a person holds something to keep her hands from doing anything else. And she was looking at Owen, and then at me, and I watched her try to fit what he was saying into the story she had carried for 23 years, and find that it would not go. There was no version of a girl playing soldier that ended with a captain telling a wedding hall he was alive because of her. The frame she had built could not hold the picture, and I saw the moment she understood that the frame was going to have to break, and I felt, again, that heavy tenderness, because whatever else she was my mother, and a person watching her own certainty collapse in public is not a pleasant thing to witness, even when the certainty deserved to fall. When Owen finished, the room did something I will remember for the rest of my life. It stood, not all at once and not on any command. A veteran near the back rose first, an older man with a folded way of standing that told you his knees remembered a war. And then his wife rose with him, and then a table of Owen's army friends were up, and then it moved through the hall the way a wind moves through a field, until nearly everyone was on their feet with their glasses lifted, and I sat there in my dress blues in the middle of it, the person the whole thing was pointed at, and I could not stand because my legs would not have held me. I have received medals from generals on parade fields. Nothing has ever undone me like 200 people at my sister's wedding getting quietly to their feet for a truth they had learned 4 minutes earlier. Frances beside me was on her feet with the rest, and she was not looking at the room. She was looking down at me, and she was smiling, and there were tears standing in her eyes, and she said, just to me, under the noise, about time, ma'am. I looked at my sister while he spoke. Camille had her hand over her mouth, and her eyes were wet, and I understood that she was hearing it for the first time. Not the fact that I was in the army, the fact of what that had meant, what her sister had actually done while the family filed her under difficult. My mother found me during the meal. She took my elbow and drew me toward the edge of the room, near the coat check, and she asked me, in a low, urgent voice, to let it go, to not make more of this than it needed to be, to not embarrass the family. She said the word family the way she always did, as a thing I was forever on the edge of harming by being myself. I did not raise my voice. I have thought since about why. I think it is because I finally had nothing to prove, and therefore nothing to shout. I am not embarrassing anyone, Mom, I said. I am just done pretending to be smaller, so you are comfortable. She stared at me. I do not think anyone in her life had ever said such a plain thing to her. She opened her mouth to remake it into an accusation that I was being dramatic, that I always did this. And then she looked past me and saw the room, saw the guests still glancing toward table 4 with something like respect, and she closed her mouth because for once the story she wanted to tell had too many witnesses to the other one. It was my father who took the first real step. He came and sat beside me later with his tie loosened, and he asked me quietly about the star. Not was it the kind you could frame. He asked me what happened. He asked me to tell him. It was the first genuine question my father had asked about my life in longer than I could measure, and I nearly could not answer it for the size of what it opened. I did not raise my voice. I just stopped lowering it. And the room, which had spent an afternoon rearranging itself around the truth, did not fall apart. It settled. You should know that a single afternoon does not remake a family. The reveal reordered the room, but a room is easier to reorder than the people who have spent decades furnishing it. What happened at that reception was not a fairy tale where everyone learns the lesson before the band packs up. It was slower and stranger, and, in its way, more honest than that. Camille found me between courses. She sat down in the empty chair beside me, her veil off now, her makeup a little undone from crying, and she asked me the question I had waited most of my life to be asked and had stopped expecting. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" she said. "I did," I told her, and it was not an accusation, it was just the truth, laid down gently between us. "For 20 years, I said. "Every time I came home. You called it bragging, or you changed the subject, or Preston made it a joke. I stopped saying it, because saying it cost me something every time, and it never once bought me anything. I am not angry at you, Camille. I just want you to know that the silence was not mine. I handed it to you for years, and you kept handing it back." She cried again at that, quietly, and she did not defend our mother, which was its own small miracle, and she took my hand across the tablecloth and held it. And we sat like that for a while, 2 sisters learning each other late. Preston, meanwhile, was drowning and did not know it. He had found Lieutenant Colonel Rhee near the bar and was trying to do the thing he did, the name-dropping, the country club, the man he golfed with, who knew a senator. And Rhee, who was a gracious man, kept returning every volley to me. "That is interesting," he would say. "And did you know your sister briefed a 4-star on that very subject? Or the senator you mentioned sat on the committee that funded the program the colonel ran. Every road Preston tried to build to his own importance, Rhee quietly rerouted back through mine, not cruelly, just accurately. And I watched my brother slowly understand that the currency he had traded on his whole life, the visible, purchasable kind of status, was worth nothing in this particular room. He grew quiet. I had never seen Preston quiet. It is a strange thing to watch a person discover, in real time, that the ground they have stood on their whole life is not bedrock but a stage, and that the stage has just been rolled into a different theater where their lines do not land. I did not enjoy it as much as I had expected to. My brother, stripped of his currency, looked briefly like the boy he had been before the family taught him that being seen was the same as being worth something, and I felt an unexpected pity for him because he had been handed a lie about what makes a life matter just as surely as I had been handed one. And his lie was only easier to live inside until a room like this one came along and stopped applauding. Across the hall, my mother sat at her table and watched guest after guest cross the floor to me. A great uncle who had been in Korea and wanted to shake my hand. A neighbor's husband who had served and simply said, "Thank you, ma'am," and walked away with his eyes bright. A young cousin who asked, shyly, whether it was true I flew helicopters, and laughed when I told her no, I built roads and took bombs off them, which was less exciting to explain and more frightening to do. My mother watched all of this. She could not narrate her way out of it, and she could not join it, because to join it she would have had to admit she had been wrong for 23 years, in public, on a day she had wanted to be about my sister, and she was not able to do that. So she sat, and her discomfort was not something I did to her. It was simply the natural weather of a person whose story has run out of listeners. Late in the evening, I saw Francis Udall and Owen standing together near the windows, talking, and I drifted close enough to hear, and they were trading details. Francis said a thing about the road that night, and Owen finished it. And Owen said a thing about the riverbed. And Francis nodded, because the two of them had been at opposite ends of the same worst night of a boy's life, and had never met until now. Camille had come to stand near me, and she heard it too, the two accounts fitting together like the halves of something, and I watched the last of the family myth die quietly in my sister's face, the myth that Nadine had run off to play, replaced by the fact of Nadine who had gone to a terrible place and done a hard thing and come home and said nothing, because home had no room for it. There was a moment, late, that I keep. My youngest cousin, the one who had asked whether I flew helicopters, came and sat beside me with the fearless directness of a 9-year-old and asked whether I was in charge of a lot of people. I told her yes. She thought about that, swinging her feet under the chair, and then she asked whether I ever got scared. And the table near us went a little quiet, because it is the question the adults had been too polite or too proud to ask. I told her the truth. I told her that I got scared all the time, and that being brave did not mean not being scared. It meant being scared and doing the right thing anyway, and that anyone who told her different was selling something. She nodded very seriously, filing it away in whatever place children keep the important things, and then she asked if she could touch the eagle on my shoulder, and I said yes. And she reached up with one small finger and touched it, and looked at me with a kind of wonder that no adult in my family had ever once directed at me. And I thought, that is it. That is the whole thing. That is all I ever wanted, and it took a child to give it. I looked up, and my mother was watching us, the child and me and the eagle, from across the room, and something moved across her face that I could not read and did not try to. For once, I did nothing to make it easier for them. And the world did not end. It just got quieter and truer. The repair, when it started with my father, and it started honestly, which is the only way repair holds. He found me on the terrace outside the hall where I had gone for air. The night had cooled, and the music came muffled through the glass, and my father stood beside me at the railing for a while without speaking, the way men of his generation gather themselves. Then he said that he owed me something and did not know how to begin, and so he would just begin badly. He said that he had known, in the way you know a thing you refuse to look at, that I had done more than the family ever admitted. And that he had stayed quiet at every dinner, every joke, every time your mother waved it off, he said, because it was easier and because I am a coward about your mother, and I have been for 50 years. He looked at his hands on the railing. I clapped for the wrong things your whole life, he said. Preston's games, Camille's dances. Good things, but small things. And I stood up for them, and I sat down for you, and I am too old to pretend I did not know the difference. I did not make it easy for him, and I think he needed me not to. I let the sentence sit. Then I told him about the riverbed. The real version, the one with the fear in it, the one I had never told anyone at that table. He listened the whole way through, and he did not check his watch. And when I finished, he had his hand over his mouth, and he said, only that he was sorry, and that he would like, if I would let him, to learn the rest of my life before he ran out of time to learn it. That was the first real repair, and it was worth more than the medal, and I told him so. Camille came out later and asked me, plainly, to be in her life. Not as the bank, she said. And I saw that she understood now what she had never let herself see. As my sister, she said. I want you to visit. I want to call you and have it not be about money. I set one term, and I said it kindly. Honesty, I said, and no more costume. She flinched at the word, and then she nodded, and she said she was sorry for the narthex, for the whisper, for a lifetime of small whispers. And I believed her, tentatively. The way you believe the first warm day in a long winter. My mother tried in her way, and her way was not enough, and I did not pretend it was. She came to me near the end of the night, and she said that if I had felt overlooked, she was sorry that I had felt that way. It is a particular kind of apology, the one that apologizes for your feeling, rather than for the thing that caused it, and I had heard it from her all my life. I did not fight her about it. I also did not accept the shape of it. I said evenly that I heard her, and that I hoped we could build something more honest, and I left it there. I did not retaliate, and I did not pretend it had landed. A grown woman is allowed to decline a counterfeit without spending the rest of the night explaining why it is counterfeit. Owen caught me by the door as the guests were thinning. He was loose now, the formality of the day worn down into something warmer, and he asked me, soldier to soldier, whether I would do him the honor of swearing him in when he pinned on Major whenever that day came. He said he could think of no one he would rather have do it. I told him it would be my privilege, and I meant it more than I had meant most things I had said in that hall, because it was a bond built on the only ground that had ever held my weight. Merit. Not blood, which I had and which had failed me. Merit, which I had earned, and which had walked into a church and come to attention when my own mother would not. I have been asked since whether I forgave them too easily. People who hear this story sometimes want more punishment in it than it contains. They want my mother brought lower, my brother humiliated further, a scene where I list every wound and make them answer for it one by one. I understand the appetite. I have felt it. But I have also spent a career watching what happens to people who organize their lives around a grievance, who keep the wound open on purpose because the wound is the only thing that ever got them looked at. And I did not want to become that. Forgiveness, the real kind, is not the same as pretending the thing did not happen, and it is not the same as letting the person back in on the old terms. I did not offer my family the old terms. The old terms were that I would be small and useful and quiet, and they would tolerate me, and those terms were dead, and I made sure everyone understood they were dead. What I offered instead was a door, not a wide one, a door with conditions that a person had to walk through honestly or not at all, and I held it open without any expectation that all of them would walk through it. My father did. Camille did. Preston, in his fumbling way, began to. My mother stood in the doorway a long time. That was her right, and their choices were theirs, and my job, the only part that was ever mine to control, was to stop holding the door shut against myself. That is the thing I had done my whole life, without seeing it. I had been the one holding the door shut, from the inside, telling myself it was them. I had agreed to be smaller so many times that I had come to believe the smallness was a fact about me rather than a choice I kept making. Owen coming to attention did not make me a colonel. I had been a colonel walking into that church. What his salute did was hand me back the knowledge that I had traded away one dinner at a time, the knowledge that I did not need their permission to be the size I actually was. Trust, I told my sister on the terrace before we went in, is not a toast. It is 100 small days. We could start with one. Time did what time does. The wedding became a story people told, and then a story they told less often, and the days closed over it. But some things were different underneath, and the difference is the whole point of telling you any of this. A letter came from Camille a few weeks later, an actual letter, on paper, which my sister had never once sent me in her life. Inside was a photograph I had not known existed, taken by someone at the reception, of Owen at attention in the narthex, and me facing him, and behind us, out of focus, my mother, with her hand frozen half-raised. Camille had written on the back, in her round, hopeful writing, that she kept looking at it and seeing something she had missed for 20 years, and that she was sorry, and that she loved me. I put the photograph on my own refrigerator, where it has stayed, held by a magnet, and it has not vanished. My father began to call. Not often and not smoothly, but he called, and when he called, he asked real questions and waited for real answers. He asked when I would deploy next, and then he wrote it down. And the next time we spoke, he remembered and asked how the preparation was going, and I sat in my office with the phone against my ear and marveled at the small, ordinary miracle of a father tracking his daughter's life. It should not be a miracle. For me, it was one, at 45, and I let myself be glad of it, without demanding it make up for everything. My mother was silent for a while, and then her silence changed. It did not become an apology, and I stopped needing it to, but it stopped being the old dismissal too. When I visited, she did not call the uniform an outfit. She did not bring it up at all, which from my mother was a kind of white flag, and I decided to take it as one. I made my peace with an ending that was not clean. Most real endings are not clean. We are sold clean endings by people who have never had to live in a family, and the honest ones are quieter and more partial, and, if you let them be, enough. Here is the thing I understood in those weeks, and it is the thing I most want to hand to you. I had spent my whole life wanting a standing ovation from that family. I had wanted my mother to see the eagle and gasp, wanted my brother to eat the joke, wanted, in some childish and undying part of me, the applause that had always gone to the trophies and the ribbons. And what I got was not that. What I got was a photograph on a refrigerator, and a father who wrote down my deployment dates, and a sister learning to call for no reason. Smaller than an ovation. Truer than one. I realized, somewhere in there, that I had stopped needing the applause the moment I stopped auditioning for it. The auditioning had been the wound, not their silence, my own long willingness to keep performing for a room that had bought no tickets. Then the official letter came. I was to be recognized at a change of command, to hand my brigade to the officer who would follow me and to be honored for the years of it, and there would be a ceremony and I would have seats to fill. And I sat with that envelope for a long time, not because I did not know who to invite, but because for the first time in my life I got to choose on my own terms, with no old debt pulling at me, and that freedom was so unfamiliar it felt almost like grief. I called Frances the night the letter came about the change of command because she was the person who would understand the size of it without my having to explain, and I told her I was having trouble deciding who to invite. And she laughed her dry laugh and said that was the best problem I had ever brought her. Then she said something I have kept. She said that most people spend their lives trying to fill the seats with the people who hurt them, hoping that if enough of the right faces are watching, the old wound will finally close. And it never does, she said, because you cannot heal a thing by performing recovery for the very people who caused it. Invite the ones who looked, ma'am, she said. Leave the empty seats empty if you have to. An empty seat is not a defeat. Sometimes an empty seat is the whole victory, because it means you finally stopped saving it for someone who was never going to sit down. I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. I thought about all the years I had, in effect, kept a seat saved for my mother. An interior seat, the best one, always reserved, always empty, and how much of my life had been arranged around the hope that she would one day come and take it. And I thought about how tired I was of dusting a chair for a guest who never arrived. I did not stop loving her. I want to be clear about that because this is not a story about deciding to stop loving your mother, which I do not believe most people can do or should try. It is a story about stopping the performance, about letting the seat be empty and finding to my surprise that the room did not feel emptier for it. It felt lighter. It felt like mine. I used to want a standing ovation from that family. What I got was better and smaller, a few people who finally looked. Months later, on a bright, hard morning in the fall, Camille and Owen drove out to the post to see me. It was the first time my sister had ever come to where I worked, and I watched her take it in, the gates and the salutes and the sheer scale of the thing her sister ran, and I saw her recalibrating in real time, the way you do when a person you thought you knew turns out to have been standing in front of a mountain the whole while, and you had only ever looked at the person. In my office, she found the silver star in its frame on the wall. She stood in front of it for a long moment. Then she asked me, quietly, to tell her the story. All of it. And this time I told her all of it, the fear and the road and the 9 soldiers and the boy in the ditch who was now her husband standing in my doorway. And my sister cried. And it was not the undone crying of the reception. It was the clean kind, the kind that washes a thing rather than mourns it. When I finished, she put her arms around me and she held on. And she said thank you, and I did not have to ask what for. The change of command came a little after that. I stood on a field in my dress blues in front of the formation and handed off the thing I had carried, and there were seats behind me for the people I had chosen. Frances Udall sat in the front row with her ribbons on and her chin up. And when they read the summary of my career, she nodded at each line the way a sergeant major nods, as if checking the work. And my father was there. He came early, which he had never done for anything of mine in my life. He wore a pressed shirt, and he stood when the others stood, and he held up his phone the whole time, filming, the way the proud parents around him filmed their own, finally, 43 years late and entirely welcome. I found his face in the crowd during the ceremony, and he was crying and not hiding it, and that was worth a great deal. Afterward, there was a small reception, coffee, and sheet cake in a hall on the post, the ordinary army kind, and my father moved through it like a man in a foreign country he had decided to love. He asked one of my majors what exactly a brigade was and how many people. And when the number came back, he looked at me across the room with an expression I had waited my whole life to see and had stopped believing existed. He was not comparing me to anyone. That was the thing that undid me, quietly by the cake. For 43 years, my accomplishments had always been measured against Preston's or Camille's, weighed on a family scale that never once tipped my way. And here was my father, finally looking at what I had built and not reaching for anyone to hold it up against. Just looking, just proud, plainly the way he had been proud in the bleachers of 100 games that were not mine. He came and stood beside me and did not say anything clever. He put his hand on my shoulder near the eagle, and he said, "Son." And then he laughed at himself, because I am not his son. And he said, I do not have the word for how this feels. And I told him that son was fine, that in the army we used it for the thing he meant, and we stood there together not talking, the way we had once stood over the open hood of a car, and it was the closest I have ever felt to him. Preston came too, which surprised me. He did not make a single joke. He stood at the back and watched the formation, and afterward he found me and shook my hand, formally, and told me that he had looked up what a silver star was, actually read about it, and that he had not understood, and that he was sorry, and it came out of him stiffly, like a machine that had never been asked to make that particular part before. I took it for what it was, which was real and imperfect, and a beginning. My brother will probably always love the visible things, but he looked at me that day the way you look at someone whose measure you have finally taken, and he has not made the summer camp joke again, not once. And for Preston, that is nearly a poem. My mother and I made our peace, and I will not lie to you and call it more than it was. It was a smaller relationship than the one I had wanted as a girl, honest in the places it could be honest and quiet in the places it could not. She never fully said the words, but she came to the ceremony, and she sat. And afterward, she touched the eagle on my shoulder, just for a second, with one finger, the way you touch a thing you are afraid of and have decided to stop being afraid of. It was not an ovation. I had stopped needing one. It was a woman late in her life, admitting with a fingertip what she could not say with her voice. And I let it be enough, because I had finally learned the difference between the peace you earn and the apology you are owed. And I had decided to live on the first one. I want to talk to you now, whoever you are listening to this. Maybe you are the one in your family who does not fit the frame. Maybe you have spent years folding yourself smaller so that the people you love will keep recognizing you in the old outline. Maybe someone has looked at the thing you built your life to become and called it a costume. Hear me. You do not owe anyone a smaller version of yourself. Not your comfort, not your silence, not the applause you keep auditioning for. The people who are meant to see you will come to attention on their own, in their own time. And the ones who never do were never the measure of you to begin with. Put on the uniform, whatever your uniform is. Press it until it holds a line. Walk in as exactly who you work to become. If someone made you feel small for being exactly who you work to become, hear me. You do not owe anyone a smaller version of yourself. Stand up straight, let them catch up. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this one. It still amazes me that it took a stranger in a uniform to make my own mother look at me when all she ever had to do in 23 years was ask. If you have ever been the one in your family who did not fit the frame, I would love to hear from you. Do you think I was right to keep the uniform on that morning instead of keeping the peace? Would you have accepted my mother's apology or held the line the way I did? And has someone in your life ever called the thing you worked hardest for a costume? Tell me in the comments because I read them and they mean a great deal to me. If this story moved you, please like it, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that they do not owe anyone a smaller version of themselves. I'll see you in the next one.